Now what we're going to do is a little primer on the different line of shoes we have and what is used for what. As a lot of you probably know, we originally started out with the wooden shoe, and because of request and discussing things with different people, what we've ended up doing is we've got about 150 thousandths cut out for sole relief. And these come on the wooden shoe and the EVA wood shoe. They have the sole relief all cut out already on all of them. And all of the shoes come with a rim pad now. Now, if you don't want to use the rim pad, they can come off quite easily, but I recommend trying the rim pad to start with. Oftentimes, by the time we're called, everyone has trimmed this horse, and the biggest problem with this horse is he's probably walking on his sole. The EVA, the leather has been put on there, and if you can look here closely, you'll notice that the leather is actually tipped. We look at it as either a funnel shoe or a cup shoe, but what the idea is that you somewhat match your trim to the pitch of the leather, and this will help seat the hoof in the shoe. So if I put this in here, it's going to actually kind of cup the whole hoof in the shoe. And this works really well when you're applying it because it doesn't have a tendency to want to slide off. And generally speaking, you want to put the EVA where the hoof should be, not necessarily where it is. Some of these horses that have long toe, low heel, they've migrated forward. Some club feet have migrated back. What you want to do is ideally put the EVA leather or the EVA wood or the wood where you want the shoe to be, and that's going to give you the proper biomechanics. The proper biomechanics creates the proper function, and the proper function will then create the proper growth. So these are really critically important to put this where you want it. Now, as far as how you attach it, what I've done here is I've pilot drilled a couple holes, and you can do a couple, 3 on each side, whatever you think you need for the activity that horse is going to be doing. Now, some of these very laminitic horses, they're quite sore and you may not have to do much. On some of these other horses that are just kind of sore and they need some protection and some proper biomechanics, you may want to put a couple on each side. My suggestion is to run a drill from this side down, coming out about where a good nail would be placed if you're driving nails up. The screws work extremely well. I do realize that some people don't want screws, don't want to do screws. So what you can do is you can use any of the glues, the Equalox or Adhere or Superfast. The nice thing about the Equalox is you can mix some copper sulfate in with the Equalox to kind of combat any bacteria that might be surfacing. So if you end up putting on the shoe with glue, try to use one of the glues with the copper sulfate. Now, another thing that works out really, really well is if for some reason you don't want to use screws to hold it on, what you can do is run a few screws in the EVA or EVA leather wood, whatever ones, as locating pegs. So you've got these little screws just sticking up about 1 inch, not going into the hoof, so that when you then run your Elasticon around it, it's going to kind of hold these screws on, and they're going to act as anchors. When you're going to apply these, always, without exception, always apply these with the horse standing on the EVA. Do not try to put these on in your lap, because what happens is I have this in the air and I try to wrap it in the air. There's space between the hoof and the shoe, and so the minute that horse then stands on it, what's going to happen is they're going to compress into this a little bit, and it's going to get loose, and you're going to lose them much more. So what I try to do is find where the horse wants to stand naturally, and then I'll take something that I can elevate this up off the ground a little bit, like an old EVA, a block of wood or whatever, and I try to get that centered. And then with the horse standing on it, they usually love it, and they'll pick their foot up and they won't move. With the horse standing on it, what I will do then is I'll take the Elasticon and I'll go around it with the Elasticon, probably twice. And then I cut the Elasticon on here. Now, if you want to glue or if you want to use the copper sulfate, I more than recommend copper sulfate powder. And the way that we actually use the copper sulfate powder is, if you can imagine this being a cast, what I typically do is I usually have someone with me, and I've got my gloves on. I take the cast out of the pouch, it's been wet, and I'll pull this out and I'll have my assistant sprinkle copper sulfate on the substrate, or on the substrate, on the cloth, and then I roll it back up. Now I've got the copper sulfate here so that when I apply it to the foot, I've got direct contact of the copper sulfate. Even if I've got the Elasticon on first, we can then put the copper sulfate on top of that, and the copper sulfate will migrate through the Elasticon and go into the foot. It works extremely well, and I more than recommend it if you think that horse's feet are going to get wet between when you do it and when you come back. So if we can do that, that'll work great. Now, applying the Elasticon or applying the cast is done the same way. You want to make sure that you get plenty of material at the very base of the EVA, so that if I pick this up now, you can see that I've got all the product of the casting material at the bottom of this base. And then what I'll do is I can start running it up a little bit to help hold it on. But I want to make sure that I don't forget the base of the EVA, and then when I go around it, I'm going to migrate up to the hoof wall so that we've got it all held together really well. Once we've got that on there, what I typically do will cut this and then let the horse walk a little bit. Now keep in mind, it's only being held with Elasticon, so the corners aren't too great, but let the horse walk. If you've got it where you want, you've got the good heel-toe landing, the horse seems comfortable, heads drop, and they're chewing, then what you want to do is just preserve this with a cast. So once this is on, then we just take our casting material and we're basically going to do the same thing. We're going to go around this with the EquiCast, and then at the end what we end up doing is the same thing that we had done before, is take the stretch wrap and then you just go around this with the stretch wrap, and this is just going to hold everything together. And you pull this fairly tight, and this is going to form the cast around all the ridges and what have you of the foot. And I typically will leave that on there for probably 4 or 5 minutes. In the wintertime, it's a little bit longer than the summertime, but we basically now got the casted EVA on the foot, and you can see that we've got good coverage around the base of the EVA. We're not worrying about going over the bottom of the EVA. But some of the biggest mistakes that I hear people make is they're trying to wrap this thing in their legs this way. You always, always, always want to wrap it on a shim that helps pick the foot up off the ground. And the reason for that is just to make sure that you've got enough casting material at the bottom. Now what's interesting is, the next question is, how do you apply this one? Well, ironically enough, you apply the wood with the rim pad exactly the same way as we did the EVA leather. And then we've got the EVA wood with the leather. It's done exactly the same way. So the application on all three is done the same way. Now, why do you use one over the other? The wood, the solid wood one with the rim pad, is usually used if someone has taken a huge huge resection on the foot, especially if they've done a dorsal wall resection. You need the integrity of the wood. On some medial lateral imbalances or medial lateral sinkers, you want the stability of the wood. The trick with the wood is you need to know more about biomechanics when applying the wood, because the horse can't alter these as easily as you can the EVA. If you are a question in your mind as to the biomechanics that horse will need, then probably your next best option is the EVA wood. You get the rigidness of the wood, so you can still do a like a horse that's got a resection. You can still use that, and you can use the EVA wood on some of your medial-lateral sinkers. And then if you have a horse that has prolapse through the foot quite a bit, the value of the sole relief comes into play quite a bit with the wood with the leather rim pad. Now, if you have a horse that is just kind of a thin-soled horse, he's showing some laminitis tendencies, he's kind of rocked back a little bit, but you haven't got a prolapse sole and you do have some sole integrity. It may not be much, it may be only 4 or 5 millimeters. You can use these very effectively. Now, the one thing that's critically important is when you apply the foot on this, you want to make sure that there's a space here for the sole. You don't want the sole on the leather. You want this foot to be able to settle into the leather and then let the horse start loading the leather relative to their comfort and movement. But ideally what you want to have is you want to see that that sole is up off from the leather pad. Now over time what will happen is the horse will sink into the leather, kind of like this. But what's interesting is if we look at the leather that was on this horse, you can see that this looks very much like a sole. It started to form to the contours of the sole and the frog. So now what we're doing is we're very effectively amortizing the weight evenly over the whole bottom of the foot. This will start to give us some concavity, and as the horse starts moving around, they'll be able to modify this for their comfort. So if they want to have a wedge, they're going to actually crush this and create a wedge. I do not recommend doing anything as far as putting biomechanics in the EVA leather. Put it on the horse, let the horse determine what they want. If you have the patience and the belief that this will work, what has basically happened here is that because we have the cast on the foot, we've kind of locked the foot in here. The variable, or what is most deformable, is the bottom of the foot. So as the horse moves, and if they are really trying to put a lot of pressure on their toe, the EVA is about a 60 durometer, and so it will start to crush. As it starts to crush, you'll start to get the elevation of the heel, if that's what they need. Not all horses want to get wedged up, some don't. But when you apply the EVA to the foot, you want to make sure that you put the EVA where it should be, not necessarily where the hoof is. But I think if you start following these basic rules, you'll have great success in treating a lot of these hoof problems that we have, whether it's acute laminitis, chronic laminitis. It's used quite effectively for thin soles, which may be a variation of laminitis, or it could work very, very well with just rehabbing sore-footed feet. Thanks a bunch for your time, and I'll catch you next time.